The boy burst from his room at the end of the hall and reached the top of the staircase at a dead run. He then leapt, sliding his left hand down the wall, while allowing the banister to float through the palm of the right. His feet were tucked beneath him, and he easily missed every step, touching down softly without breaking his stride on the landing below. Now this graceful and acrobatic display of boyhood physics was frowned upon inside the house, but luckily today was to be set outside, a right proper place for such things. He bolted for the screen door, where sun absorbed the rug in the vestibule, the center obscured in an intense glow. The perfect breeze came softly through the screen at him as he approached. With palm extended, he met the latch in one long push that freed the light door easily and flung it from his path. Temporarily blinded, he never slowed, sure his eyes would adjust quickly. The screen door reached its hinge end and came back with a loud breath from the piston, slamming against the jamb. Then came the familiar admonishment from behind, warning of all things dangerous, forbidden, or at the very least, dirty. This only caused him to quicken his pace, his heart pounding with unbearable desire to get out of sight and earshot. He almost tripped, catching himself with a touch of fingers to the ground going by beneath, righting himself nearly effortlessly and making for the woods at the far end of the yard with as much zeal as he could ever remember. He could already hear the rushing water of the creek. This was a respectable creek by any standards, but this was his wild river, in an isolated and ancient forest. He abruptly raised his forearms in barricades against the saplings lining the farthest reaches of the yard. Crashing through, he was soon on one of the countless trails that he and the deer had charted and established. They crisscrossed the water's edge and adjacent. When the bend of his river was within sight, and saplings thinned out, he slowed and took deeper breaths through flaring nostrils. He recognized the smells, the emanating warm odor from the moist and spongy forest floor. It still caused knots of uncertainty in his stomach, for each foray into the wild was brand new, full of inherent danger and promise. With the bright sun diminished by the canopy of leaves, a morning crispness to the air cooled the lone bead of sweat creeping down his temple, giving him an unexpected shiver. He staggered forward a few more feet to a flat rock under an old weeping willow at the water's edge, then lay on his back a moment, catching his breath. "Pace yourself," he said. "Good idea," he amended. Some of the larger maple leaves above were easily 10 inches wide, and they rushed against one another, the clamor increasing with intensity as the breeze picked up, all but quieting when it resided. When his wind returned sufficiently, he moved to a soft and perfectly dry patch of sunlit warmth a few feet away and just beyond reach of shadow. Then he crossed his legs and descended cross-legged to the ground. It was now time to take stock of everything. From his pocket he drew the most secret item, a butane lighter. It had come empty from the back of the junk drawer, as had the can of butane for refilling it. He was careful to return the can just as it had been found. However, the old brass lighter barely worked and would likely never be missed among the many varied and mostly forgotten artifacts. Over the years, the junk drawer in the kitchen was a continual object of curiosity, yielding the most interesting and useful things, apparently all but abandoned items. The lighter lay in his open left palm only a second before he suddenly closed the hand and peered intently through the brush, listening to the whispers of the woods and water. When his nerves had calmed some, he opened his hand to reveal the forbidden object again. He lifted the cover and rolled the wheel with his thumb. Its sparks ignited a small, weary flame. It struggled in the light breeze. He snapped it closed just as quickly, thinking he had again heard something. Next, a small pocket knife tumbled past the fumbling hand in his right pocket, dropping next to him in the leaves. This was only partly a forbidden item, normally only to be used with adult supervision. With some difficulty, he managed getting his particularly chewed fingernail in the notch along the biggest of both blades and pry it into the open. When he held it up, the light playing along the edge was somewhat hypnotic. Brushing his thumb across it to feel the sharpness, he said, "Should be sharper." Digging about further in his pockets, he assembled the remaining items in front of him. A zip bag containing 1 pack of gum, half a dozen hard lemon candies, a length of bootlace, and one $2 bill taken from a collection of them in a drawer in the big desk in the den. Finally, from his back pocket, he withdrew the map that he'd been keeping during explorations. Unrolling the map revealed a 4-inch, slightly dulled pencil carefully coiled within. He felt the pencil should be sharper too, but he smiled widely at his otherwise preparedness. The map was rather detailed, and he was proud. It depicted the lay of his river as far as he'd been. In addition, certain landmarks were labeled along both sides with a sketch of sorts. Points like Mossy Rock and Great Old Oak were accompanied by their caricature likenesses. He didn't need to look the map over too long. He noted Big Bend and the Six Prong, represented with only small notation as the general location, for this was largely uncharted territory. The area had been explored little, what with the walk home so long and the fear of dark. Today there was time, if he got moving now. On his wrist he wore the watch given to him on his 7th birthday, now a few years ago. It was attached to a wide band. The plain white face below the scratched and scuffed glass now bore his apparent departure time, exactly 9:15. He removed it, wound it, and placed it back on his left wrist. He tapped at it in military fashion, held it up to his ear to ensure it was running. He rose up from cross-legged to standing in one easy push of both intertwined legs, then returned everything to his pockets and was quietly moving among the trees again. The leaves were now beginning to change their color, being drawn of water from paler greens to reds to the bright yellows of the maples. The crisper approaching autumn air was apparent amidst the warm rays of the sun. It wasn't ever hard to feel a sense of wonderment in these woods, with so many old-growth trees towering above. He did not know the names of most, but he ran his hands casually over the broad trunks of some as he passed, feeling the deep bark of the oaks or the smoother bark of the swamp maples and beech. As he weaved further into the woods along his creek, he felt the isolation profoundly, and suddenly a small trepidation that had to be swallowed before continuing. He turned around to look periodically at the disappearing trail as it curved away behind. He'd gone on a while more when he began to once again consider the distance in time. He'd figured it would take perhaps 45 minutes or so, but having been to the edge of his map only once before, it now started to seem farther than he remembered. It was little matter. The walking was easy, and his pace even, with careful strides over the soft ground. He paused in his tracks occasionally to admire a particular feature in the creek here or there, or to listen to the periodic breeze and the constant rushing water. The chipmunks chipped away noisily in front of him, running in a panicked fashion, calling out alarmed. Most he never actually saw, though at times a chipmunk or squirrel could be heard foraging among leaves up ahead, sounding like a much larger creature, until the smallest movement revealed the source. In fact, the walk out had gone mostly without any problems, with the exception of a spider web he took to the face suddenly as he went along. It came as he was dipping under a few branches, and brought terror at the prospect that the spider who made it was now somewhere crawling about his person, unnoticed. He tried to put it out of his mind, though he could still feel the sensation of the webbing long after it was apparently gone. Still, he continued covering ground deliberately. Within the hour, he recognized something up ahead that told him he was getting closer. He pulled out his map and retrieved the pencil. Before him rose the Sixth Prong, as it had been named and marked. The old and many-armed oak tree was the only one he had ever seen as intact. Its moniker was derived from the 6 large trunks that had survived, fanned out from the ground, with each climbing stoutly. This seemed impossible to him, as he could barely imagine how this small group of saplings had remained together, lasting all these years without so much as one being lost to misfortune, storm, or cut down by someone at any point in the last century. Of course he could only surmise its actual age, but it made him wonderfully curious. It was now official and in the record. He sat a bit, sketching out in small icon the unprecedented tree. Its very continued existence and persistence unscathed merited the careful naming and note. He drew the general shape. With that, he rolled and folded the map again with pencil and returned it to his back pocket. Then he rose and took a couple more steps into the dappled light below the monolith. Beneath the 6 prongs, the acorns were thick. They had been quite uncomfortable under butt, and now his feet ached with the fruits of the oak beneath. Looking up, he suddenly noticed hundreds of them tarrying in the breeze. Then one or two fell to the ground around him. Before long, a sudden gust of wind caused greater numbers of them to fall from the highest boughs. Realizing the deluge to come, he quickly made for the outer reaches of the sprawling branches. Head dropped, while zigzagging beneath a torrent of small projectiles, he tried to negotiate the shortest distance to safety. They crackled on the ground all around, whizzed through the air with frightening speed and an audible hiss. Then one caught him on the right hand where it was straggling behind. It stung with ferocity and brought with it a tear of pain, but surprisingly one of humiliation as well. As it rolled down on the next blink, he somehow felt scolded. He quickly tucked both arms, trying to present the smallest target possible, but as another nut glanced off his back, one hit him directly on the softest part of his skull. The force was not sufficient to knock him down. The pain did that alone. Another few tears joined his cheeks, accompanied again with the odd feeling that he had been punished. He managed to scramble forward on all fours and pushed himself up about halfway, wiping tears, rubbing at his hand, back, and throbbing head almost all at once.